Historical presidential election is underway in Colombia, with candidates offering two different sets of ideologies and change in the country. Voters will now choose between two different futures for Colombia. A leftist former guerrilla is pushing an intense social change, and a centrist construction magnate who has promised to fight corruption. Gustavo Petro, former mayor of capital Bogota and current senator, has pledged to fight inequality with free university education, pension reforms and high taxes on unproductive land. His proposals, especially a ban on new oil projects, have alarmed few investors. Rodolfo Hernandez, a 77-year-old businessman and former mayor of Bucaramanga, has emerged as Colombia's most disruptive presidential candidate in decades. Electrifying voters with his TikTok posts, he has promised minimal government involvement in certain areas of public and private sectors and to finance social programs by stopping corruption. He has also pledged to provide free narcotics to addicts in an effort to combat drug trafficking in the country. Despite his anti-corruption stand, Hernandez himself is under a corruption investigation. There are allegations that he intervened in a trash management tender to benefit a company his son lobbied for. The contest also has a number of firsts. If 62-year-old former guerrilla Gustavo Petro wins, he will be Colombia's first leftist leader. Petro won the first round with just 40% of the votes. Also, for the first time, the running mates for both final round candidates are Afro-Colombian women. In August, Colombia will see its first black woman vice president in a country where women representation at multiple government levels is low, and there is a constant violence against Afro-Colombian women. About 39 million people are eligible to cast their ballots in today's runoff. Hernandez has pledged to respect the results, while Petro has raised doubts about the honesty of the electoral officials. Well, joining us live now is Emily Hart. She's a journalist from Medellin, Colombia. Emily, good to see you and welcome to WION.
Great to be here.
What are the chances of Colombia making history and electing first leftist president in this runoff?
The last polls showed less than 1% between the two men. I was down at the polls today and it is looking too close to call, even on the day of the voting itself. We just can't know right now.
We just can't know right now, but how are the elections so far? Because we understand that the polls have opened. How are the elections so far? How is the voting process?
They have opened. So far, all is peaceful. There were a lot of concerns in the run-up to the elections. And over those concerns, there are now about 100,000 police on standby in Colombia today. The risks are that either side do not accept the results. Also, there's a risk of electoral fraud, and there have been a lot of concerns about Colombia's many armed groups staging interventions in the elections. So it's a pretty tense day.
Probably can briefly tell us about Petro and Hernandez. How are they, and what is the electorate saying about them?
So Petro was a former guerrilla in his youth. After that, he demobilized. He spent 30 years in institutional politics. He's one of the most impressive congressmen the country has seen, a lot of opposition, which has achieved a lot. He's brought a lot of debates into the public eye and achieved accountability for war crimes amid the political elite. It's his third time running for president. So he's got a lot of experience. He's got this very popular running mate, Francia Marquez, who, as you mentioned, she's an award-winning environmental activist, an Afro-Colombian woman, a single mother. I've spoken to a lot of my sources who say that she simply understands what it is like to be Colombian. Rodolfo Hernandez is a wild card. A lot of people simply did not see it coming. He swung to 28% of the vote in the first round, beating out the establishment candidate. As you say, his politics revolve around anti-corruption, transparency, austerity. Beyond that, he doesn't have many political proposals. So it's a real leap into the unknown with Hernandez if Colombia does choose him today.
Emily, finally, implementing the peace accord has always been a thorny issue in Colombia, despite both candidates pledging that they will ensure that the accord is implemented. What does the role of women in Colombia impact this accord, and why is it so important in the country?
The peace accord with the FARC, signed in 2016, is a 300-page document. It is an incredibly holistic approach to combating violence and creating peace, not just peace understood as a lack of violence, but as a sustainable situation for the country in which people do not turn to arms for political struggle. This government particularly has been completely negligent in the implementation of the peace process. We are very, very behind where we should be in terms of implementation. So it's a great positive that both candidates are in favour. Both vice presidents are women. Only one is a self-declared feminist. Only one embodies a feminist politics outwardly. And Petro himself has said he is a man in deconstruction in terms of his feminism. Meanwhile, Hernandez has been accused of great machismo. A video came out this week of him partying on a yacht with a number of young women. Presumably his wife was at home. So in terms of progressive gender politics, we're certainly looking to Petro. And the peace accords had an enormous and very progressive focus on gender, on women in peace building. So whoever wins, we can keep our fingers crossed that that peace accord will finally be implemented.
Well, live from Medellin, Colombia, I've been talking to journalist Emily Hart. Thank you very much for making time and talking to WION today.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.